There is a particular kind of hope that flourishes only in desolation, a stubborn weed that forces its way through the cracks of a shattered life. It is not the bright, verdant hope of sunny meadows and easy promises, but a pale, tenacious thing, nurtured by the thinnest slivers of light. It lives in the hollow space behind the ribs, a quiet flutter that persists even when the heart has grown too heavy to beat with any rhythm but sorrow. This was the hope Alara carried, a secret seed cupped in the palm of her soul, a thing so fragile she dared not speak its name. It was all she had left, this and the gentle, rolling shifts of the life growing within her. The world had taken everything else. Her pack, her name, her safety. All had been stripped away in a ceremony of public shame, leaving her bare and exposed to the biting winds of the saltwood borderlands. They had called her a disgrace, a vessel for a nameless pup, an omega who had forgotten her place. They had cast her out with stones of judgment and whispers that followed her like hungry ghosts into the unforgiving wilderness. But they had been wrong. She was not a vessel. She was a mother. And that, she was learning, was a kind of strength they could never comprehend. Her world had shrunk to the size of the crumbling trapper's cabin she'd found nestled in a forgotten fold of the mountains. Its timbers groaned under the weight of the coming winter, and the wind, a relentless predator, clawed at the clay-chinked gaps. Each morning she rose with the sun, her body a clumsy, aching vessel that felt both alien and sacred. The swell of her belly was a constant, solid presence, a reminder of her purpose. For the pup. Every splinter of firewood she gathered, every bitter root she dug from the frozen earth, every stringy rabbit she managed to snare, it was all for the pup. Her own hunger was a distant, dull ache, easily ignored. But the deep, primal need to nourish the life she carried was a fire in her veins. She would trace the firm curve of her stomach, feeling the faint, reassuring kicks from within, and whisper promises into the cold air. I will keep you safe. I will keep you warm. I will be enough. It was a prayer, a vow, a desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness. Her wolf, the other half of her soul, was a muted presence, a creature cowed by shame and starvation. It had been months since she had felt the exhilarating rush of the shift, the freedom of four paws pounding the earth. Her former alpha, Jorik, had declared her connection to the pack spirit severed. A lone wolf was a dead wolf, he had sneered, his eyes cold with the pleasure of her ruin. But even in its weakened state, her inner wolf was tethered to the new life, a low, protective growl in the back of her mind, a constant hum of maternal instinct. If you're captivated by stories of strength against impossible odds, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Today, the hunger was a sharper beast. The aitif last of the dried berries were gone, and her snares had been empty for 2 days. A premature dusting of snow clung to the pines, a stark white shroud that made the world silent and unforgiving. Pulling her threadbare cloak tighter, Alara ventured farther from the cabin than she normally dared. The territory of her old pack, the Silver Moons, lay to the south. To the north lay the vast, untamed lands of the Whisperwood, ruled by a king whose name was spoken only in hushed, fearful tones. King Theron, the Alpha of Alphas, a shifter of mythic power who did not tolerate trespassers. Stories claimed his wolves were the size of ponies, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. They said he was not a true wolf at all, but something older, more primal. Alara kept to the invisible line between the two territories, a no-man's land where she prayed she would be overlooked by both. She found a small patch of wintercress near a frozen stream, its green leaves a shock of life against the snow. Kneeling, her back screaming in protest, she began to gather the precious greens, her fingers numb with cold. This will be enough. For today. The thought was a fragile shield against the rising panic. She could not afford to be weak. She could not afford to be afraid. She had to survive. For the pup. A twig snapped behind her. Not the gentle crack of a branch settling under snow, but the sharp, deliberate report of a heavy footfall. Alara froze, her heart seizing in her chest, her head whipped around, her senses dulled by hunger, suddenly screaming with alarm. Standing at the edge of the clearing were three figures, their forms immense and dark against the snow. They were not silver moon wolves. Their scent was entirely different, wilder, cleaner, laced with the smell of ancient forests, cold stone, and ozone. They wore no pack markings, only simple dark leathers that did not hide the sheer power coiled in their bodies. They were silent, their stillness that of apex predators who knew they had already won. Her gaze flew to the one in the center. He was taller than the others, his shoulders a formidable line that seemed to block out the sky. Even from this distance, the sheer force of his presence was a physical blow, a wave of dominance so potent it made the air crackle and the breath catch in her throat. He was the Alpha King. It could be no one else. Terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. She scrambled backward, her hands sinking into the snow, the precious winter crest scattering from her grasp. She was trespassing. He would kill her. Or worse. He took a step forward, his movements fluid and unnervingly silent for a man of his size. His companions remained where they were, sentinels of stone and shadow. As he drew closer, the details of him sharpened into terrifying focus. His hair was the color of a moonless night, and his face was all hard planes and severe angles, beautiful in a way that was brutal and unforgiving. But it was his eyes that held her, captive. They were not the amber or brown of a normal shifter, but a startling pale silver like chips of ice under a winter moon. They held an ancient intelligence, a depth of power that felt as old as the mountains themselves. And they were fixed on her. His gaze swept over her, missing nothing. The tattered cloak, the gauntness of her face, the desperate fear in her eyes. Then his gaze dropped to the pronounced swell of her stomach, and the air shifted. The pressure of his dominance did not lessen, but it changed. The cold assessment was replaced by something else, something she could not name. An intensity that was not predatory, but focused, possessive. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the silent, snow-dusted clearing. The pounding of her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He sees. He knows. She expected disgust, contempt, the same scorn she had seen in Yorick's eyes. But there was none. Only that unwavering silver stare that seemed to see past her skin, past her shame, and straight into the desperate, hopeful heart of her. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off his body, a stark contrast to the frozen air. He did not speak. The silence stretched, thin and taut, until Alara thought she might break from the strain of it. She lowered her head, a gesture of submission so ingrained she did it without thought, exposing the vulnerable line of her throat. It was the only currency she had, a plea for a swift end. Please, just don't hurt the pup. The thought was a silent scream. She waited for the blow, for the snarl of command that would end her pathetic struggle for survival. Instead, she heard the soft crunch of his boots in the snow as he took one final step. She felt his shadow fall over her. A large, calloused hand entered her field of vision, palm up, fingers slightly curled. It was an invitation, not a threat. A gesture so unexpected it shattered her terror into 1,000 pieces of confusion. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her gaze from the ground to his face. The intensity in his silver eyes was breathtaking. He was looking at her, truly looking at her, with a reverence that stole her breath. And then he spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the ground, through her very bones. It was not a command. It was a statement of fact, a declaration that remade her world in a single, devastating word. Mine. The word echoed in the frozen silence, not as a claim of ownership over a trespasser, but as a recognition, a deep, resonant chord that settled in her soul. It was a sound that her own wolf, dormant for so long, stirred to answer. A faint, questioning tremor ran through her. Mine. He did not mean her life, forfeit for her crime of existence on his land. His silver gaze was still fixed on her, but it encompassed the whole of her fear, her frailty, and the precious, undeniable curve of her belly. He meant all of it. Panic and a wild, illogical flicker of something else warred within her. No, she whispered, the sound thin and reedy. I belong to no one. It was the one truth she had clung to in her exile. Her freedom, miserable as it was her own. He showed no reaction to her denial, his expression unchanging. He simply took another step, closing the remaining distance between them. He knelt in the snow before her, an impossible gesture for a king. The movement was lithe, powerful, bringing him to her level. His eyes, now inches away, were mesmerizing, drawing her in. He was so close she could see the flecks of charcoal gray in their silver depths, could smell the scent of pine and cold, clean air that clung to him. "You are mistaken," he said, his voice softer now, but no less absolute. He reached out, his movements deliberate and slow, giving her every chance to pull away. She was frozen, a rabbit before a wolf, unable to move, unable to breathe. His fingers, warm and strong, brushed against her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth against her icy skin that shot straight to her core. It was not a touch of possession, but one of tenderness. A touch she had not felt in so long she had forgotten what it was like. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a gentle, soothing motion. "You and the child," he clarified, his gaze dropping to her stomach again, and the reverence in his eyes was unmistakable now. "You are mine. You have been since the moment your scent crossed my border." His words made no sense. He could not have known her. And yet, she felt the truth of them resonate deep within her, a strange and terrifying hum of belonging. He was claiming her pup, her child, the one thing in this world that was wholly hers. The maternal fire that had kept her alive now blazed into a protective inferno. "You cannot have him," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She pushed his hand away, the contact breaking like a fever. "He is my son. Mine alone." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. A faint, almost imperceptible softening of his mouth. It was not amusement. It was something closer to approval. "I have no intention of taking him from you," he said calmly. "I am claiming you both. To protect. To provide for." He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, towering over her once more. He extended his hand to her again. "Come with me. A storm is coming. It is not safe for you here." She stared at his hand, at the promise of shelter, and the threat of the unknown. To go with him was to trade her harsh, familiar freedom for a gilded cage. To refuse was to face the coming storm, to risk not only her own life, but the life of her child. Her hand trembled as she reached out and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, enveloping her small, cold hand in a grip that was firm, secure, and impossibly warm. If this first encounter has you hooked, hit that like button and let me know you're invested in Alara's journey. As he helped her to her feet, his guards moved forward, their expressions unreadable. One of them silently handed the king a thick, fur-lined cloak. Without a word, Theron draped it over Alara's thin shoulders. The weight of it was substantial, and the warmth that immediately began to seep into her chilled bones was dizzying. It smelled of him, of pine and winter and a clean masculine scent that was both intimidating and strangely comforting. He kept her hand in his as they began to walk, his long strides easily matching her slower, more awkward pace. The journey to his fortress was a blur of snow-laden trees and silent, powerful escorts. Alara walked in a state of shock, her mind struggling to process the cataclysmic shift in her reality. Hours ago, she had been a forgotten outcast, starving at the edge of the world. Now, she was being led into the heart of a fearsome king's territory, wrapped in his cloak, her hand held in his. She felt the curious, assessing glances of his men but heard no whispers, saw no sneers. There was only a quiet, disciplined acceptance of their king's actions. This was a different world from the one she knew, where every omega was scrutinized, judged, and ranked. Here, the king's will was absolute, and he had willed her to be at his side. The fortress, when it came into view, was not the dark, jagged castle of her imagination. It was a marvel of stone and timber, built into the side of the mountain itself, looking less like a structure imposed upon the landscape, and more like something that had grown from it. It was formidable, yes, but it spoke of permanence and strength, not cruelty. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of wood smoke and roasting meat. The scent made Alara's empty stomach clench with a painful, desperate cramp. Guards nodded respectfully as they passed, their silver eyes, so like their king's, glancing at her without malice, only a controlled curiosity. Theron led her through stone corridors and up a wide, winding staircase, his grip on her hand never faltering. He brought her to a set of heavy wooden doors and pushed them open, revealing a suite of rooms that made her gasp. A fire was already crackling in a large stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow over a soft-looking bed piled with furs, a sturdy wooden table, and cushioned chairs. It was larger than her entire cabin, and cleaner and warmer than any place she had been in months. A young woman with a kind face and gentle eyes was waiting inside. She curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty." Theron finally released Alara's hand, though she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch. "This is Anya," he said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. "She will see to your needs. You will be safe here. Rest." He looked at Alara, his silver eyes searching her face. "No one will harm you or the child. You have my word." The vow was spoken with the weight of mountains, the gravity of a king whose word was law. Before she could find her voice to respond, he turned, and was gone, the door closing with a soft, definitive click behind him. Alara stood frozen in the center of the room, the borrowed cloak a heavy weight on her shoulders. The warmth, the comfort, the sheer unreality of it all was overwhelming. Anya approached her cautiously. "My lady," she said softly, "the king has ordered a bath prepared for you, and a meal. Are you hungry?" The simple question shattered Alara's composure. The kindness in the woman's voice, the mention of food, the promise of warmth. It was too much. A sob escaped her, a raw, ragged sound torn from the depths of her exhaustion and fear. Tears she had refused to shed for months streamed down her face. She had been strong for so long, running on nothing but instinct and a mother's will to survive. But in this place of impossible safety, the walls she had built around her heart crumbled. Anya did not flinch or judge. She simply stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Alara's arm. "It is all right," she murmured. "You are safe now. Let us get you warm." Over the next few hours, Alara moved as if in a dream. She was helped out of her filthy, tattered rags and lowered into a steaming tub of water scented with lavender and chamomile. The feeling of the hot water sinking into her aching muscles was so blissful, it was nearly painful. She scrubbed away weeks of grime, watching the water turn gray, as if washing away the memory of her exile. Anya helped her dry her hair by the fire and dressed her in a soft, clean linen shift that felt like a caress against her skin. A tray of food was brought in, thick stew, fresh bread, and cheese. Alara ate slowly, forcing herself to take small bites, her shrunken stomach protesting even as her body cried out for the nourishment. Every bite was an act of worship, a gift to the child she carried. Later, tucked beneath a mountain of soft furs in the large bed, Alara lay awake, listening to the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. The storm the king had predicted had arrived, a blizzard that raged against the stone walls of the fortress. Had she still been in her cabin, she would be freezing, terrified, and starving. Here, she was warm, fed, and inexplicably safe. But safety came at a price, and she did not yet know what it was. What did he want from her? Why claim a disgraced Omega and her nameless pup? Kings did not act on whims. Every move was calculated. I am a pawn, a curiosity. The old insecurities, the venomous whispers of her past slithered into her thoughts. He will grow tired of me. He will see the worthless thing I am and cast me aside, just like Yorick did. A kick from within, stronger this time, sharp and insistent, broke through her spiraling fear. She placed a hand on her belly, her breath catching. It was as if the pup could sense her distress, reminding her of what truly mattered. I will not be weak. I will not be a victim. She did not know what the Alpha King's game was, but she had a purpose that superseded any royal decree. This child, her child, would be born safe and strong. She would use this strange king's protection for as long as it was offered, and she would be ready for the moment it was withdrawn. She would be a mother first, a pawn second. Sleep finally claimed her, but it was a light, restless sleep, filled with dreams of silver eyes and the deep, resonant sound of a single word, mine. Days bled into one another in a haze of warmth and quiet care. Alara's life settled into a strange rhythm, dictated by meals she did not have to forage for, and nights spent in a bed that did not leave her bones aching. Anya tended to her with a quiet, unobtrusive kindness, never asking questions about her past, never making her feel like the outcast she was. The king's court, she learned through observation, was as disciplined and silent as his guards. There were no gossiping whispers in the halls, no cruel jibes from titled ladies. There was only a pervasive, watchful respect for their leader and, by extension, for the woman he had brought into their midst. But Theron himself remained a mystery. He would visit her once a day, usually in the evenings. He never stayed long. He would simply enter her rooms, his immense presence filling the space, and watch her. He would stand by the fire, his silver eyes tracking her movements as she sat reading a book Anya had provided, or sewed a small blanket for the pup. He rarely spoke. The silence between them was a living thing, thick with unspoken questions and a tension that hummed just beneath the surface. Alara found it unnerving, yet she was not afraid. His gaze was not judgmental. It was attentive, as if he were memorizing every detail of her, learning the language of her posture, the flicker of emotion in her eyes. One evening, a high-ranking male, his face set in lines of arrogant disdain, passed her in the corridor as she was taking a short, supervised walk. He did not bow his head, and as he passed, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "The king brings a stray into his kennel. How quaint." The insult was familiar, a ghost of Yorick's sneering voice, and it struck her with the force of a physical blow. She flinched, her hand flying to her belly protectively, her face burning with shame. Before she could even process the sting, Theron was there. He had been walking several paces behind her, a silent shadow she hadn't even noticed. He moved with a speed that was unnatural, a blur of dark leather and controlled fury. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch the other alpha. He simply stopped in front of him, blocking his path. The temperature in the corridor dropped. "Lord Valerius," Theron said, his voice a low, deadly calm that was far more terrifying than any shout. "You will address my mate with the respect she is due." Mate. The word struck Alara with the force of lightning. He had never used it before. Valerius paled, his arrogance vanishing like smoke. He bowed low, his body trembling. "Forgiveness, my king. I did not realize." "You will realize it now," Theron interrupted, his voice like chipping ice. "You will go to the kennels. You will clean them. For a month. And if you ever show her anything less than absolute reverence again, you will not have a tongue with which to apologize." Without another word, Theron turned his back on the humiliated lord and placed a gentle hand on the small of Alara's back, guiding her away. He said nothing of the incident, but his message to the entire court was clear. She was his. To insult her was to insult him, and no one insulted the king. That night he came to her rooms as usual, but instead of standing by the fire, he approached the chair where she sat. He held something in his hand. He knelt before her, just as he had in the snow, and opened his palm. Resting on it was a small, exquisitely carved wooden wolf, its head tilted back in a silent howl. It was smooth and perfect, the grain of the wood flowing like a soft pelt. "For the pup," he said, his voice a low rumble. Alara stared at the tiny wolf, her throat tight. It was the first gift her child had ever received. A gift from this terrifying, powerful king who called her his mate. Her carefully constructed walls of suspicion and fear began to tremble. She reached out a hesitant hand and took the carving. Its surface was warm, as if it held the heat from his skin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. He did not move, remaining knelt before her. The position was one of supplication, a stark contrast to the absolute power he wielded. It was disarming. Bolstered by a courage she didn't know she possessed, she finally asked the question that had been haunting her for days. "Why?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" He was silent for a long moment, his silver eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was raw with an emotion she couldn't identify. "What do I want?" he repeated softly. "I want to hear your laughter. I want to see the fear leave your eyes. I want to hold my son in my arms and know that his mother is safe and cherished beside me." He paused, and the vulnerability that flickered in his gaze was a revelation. "For 100 years, I have been a king, a guardian, a soldier. I have been alone. Then I caught your scent on the wind. A scent of sorrow and courage and fierce, unwavering love, and I knew my solitude was over." His confession hung in the air between them, intimate and staggering. He was not playing a game. This was not a whim. It was something deeper, something fated, that she could barely begin to understand. Are you feeling the connection between them? Drop a comment and let me know what you think about King Theron. The fragile peace of Alara's new life was shattered by the arrival of a messenger from the south. News traveled slowly in the winter, but not slowly enough. Alpha Jorik of the Silver Moon Pack had learned of her whereabouts, demanded her return. The messenger, a nervous wolf from a neutral border clan, delivered the scroll to Theron in the Great Hall. Alara was present, standing near the warmth of the central hearth, and she saw the shift in the king's posture as he read the missive. His stillness became absolute, the dangerous calm before a storm. He did not show her the scroll, but he did not need to. She knew. She could feel Yorik's possessive greed reaching for her, even from miles away. He had cast her out, but he could not bear the thought of another alpha, especially not the Alpha King, finding value in what he had discarded. Her worth, in his eyes, was not her own. It was a reflection of the male who claimed her. "He claims you are his," Theron said later when they were alone in her chambers. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but she could see the fury simmering in the depths of his silver eyes. He cites the old laws, that an Omega who has not been formally released from her birth pack still belongs to her Alpha. He says you fled. He conveniently omits the part where he exiled you. Alara's blood ran cold. He will not take me, she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. Her hand, as always, went to her belly. He will not have my son. Never, Theron vowed, his tone leaving no room for doubt. You are mine. The law he cites is dust. My law is the only one that matters here. But she saw the worry etched around his eyes. Jorik was not powerful enough to challenge Theron in open war, but he was cunning. He could cause trouble, rally other, smaller packs with lies, and invoke treaties that could lead to bloodshed. Theron was a king, and a king had to consider the lives of his people. The fear planted a seed of doubt in her heart. For all his power, for all his vows, Theron was still a king bound by duty. Would he risk a war for a stray Omega? The question was a poison, seeping into her newfound sense of security, reviving all her old insecurities. I am a burden, a complication. She began to withdraw into herself again, the easy, tentative trust she had started to feel for him fracturing under the weight of her fear. She watched him come and go, saw the grim set of his jaw, and knew he was planning, strategizing. But he did not confide in her. The distance between them grew, a silent chasm of her making. She was so accustomed to being a liability that she could not comprehend being a priority. In her mind, when the choice came down to it, he would choose his kingdom. He would always choose his kingdom. She had been chosen last her entire life. Why would now be any different? One night she awoke from a nightmare, her heart pounding, the phantom feel of Yorik's cruel hands on her. She was covered in a cold sweat, the fear so real it was a taste in her mouth. She slipped out of bed and went to the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. The fortress was silent, a sleeping giant around her. I cannot rely on him, she thought, the realization a cold, hard stone in her gut. I cannot rely on anyone, only myself. She had to have a plan. If Theron decided she was not worth the trouble, if he even considered handing her back to Yorik, she would not wait to be disposed of. She would run. She would take her pup and disappear into the wilderness, where no Alpha could ever find them. The thought was terrifying, but it was also empowering. It was a choice. Her choice. Her resolve was tested sooner than she could have imagined. A few days later, Theron entered her rooms, his face grim. Yorik has invoked the right of challenge, he announced, his voice tight. Not a challenge of war, but a personal one. He demands to meet me at the border to state his claim before the old spirits. It is a formality, but one I must honor to avoid the appearance of tyranny. He was going to meet him. The words struck Alara like a physical blow. You are going to see him? I must, Theron said, his eyes pleading for her to understand. It is politics, Alara, a display. I will not let him touch you. I will not let him take you. But I must go through the motions. But all she heard was that he was leaving. He was going to meet the monster from her past. The logical part of her brain understood his reasoning, but the terrified, wounded part of her, the part that had been shaped by betrayal, screamed that this was the beginning of the end. This was how it started. A meeting, a negotiation, a compromise, and she would be the price. That night, she watched from her window as Theron and a small retinue of his guards rode out from the fortress, their dark shapes swallowed by the pre-dawn gloom. He was gone. He had left her. The panic she had been holding at bay crashed over her in a suffocating wave. He had left her to face her monster alone, even if it was just in her mind. It didn't matter what he had promised. Yorik had promised to cherish her once too. Promises were just words, and words could be broken as easily as bones. Her decision was made in that moment of cold, stark terror. She could not wait. She could not trust. She had to save her son. Moving with a feverish haste, she dressed in the warmest clothes she could find. She packed a small bag with a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and the small wooden wolf Theron had given her. It was the only thing of value she possessed, and she could not bring herself to leave it behind. Her escape was surprisingly easy. The fortress was built for defense against armies, not for containing a single desperate woman. She knew the guards' patrol schedules from her short walks with Anya. Slipping through a side door used by the kitchen staff, she found herself outside in the biting cold. The world was shades of gray and blue in the hour before sunrise. The snow was deep, but a path had been cleared toward the stables. She would not take a horse. That would be noticed too quickly. She would go on foot, into the deep woods where she could cover her tracks. She would run north, deeper into the king's own territory. It was a risk, but Yorick would expect her to run south, back toward the familiar. He would not think to look for her in the heart of his rival's lands. As she plunged into the thick forest that bordered the fortress, a new strength surged through her. This was not the flight of a scared victim. This was the determined retreat of a mother bear, drawing danger away from her cub, choosing her own ground. Her wolf, so long suppressed, was awake and alert, its senses sharp. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce primal resolve. Let the alphas have their posturing and their politics. She had a more important duty. She would not be a prize to be fought over. She and her pup, they would be free. The forest was a labyrinth of snow-heavy pines and skeletal birch. The going was slow and arduous, her pregnant body clumsy and easily tired. Every step was a struggle in the deep snow, her breath pluming in the frigid air. But she pushed on, driven by a desperate energy. Hours passed. The sun rose, a pale, watery disk in the sky, offering little warmth. She paused only to eat a few mouthfuls of bread, her eyes constantly scanning the woods around her, her ears straining for any sound of pursuit. She was alone, utterly and completely alone, just as she had been in the beginning. There was a grim satisfaction in it. She had survived alone before. She would do it again. As dusk began to settle, painting the snow in shades of lavender and rose, a sharp, sudden pain shot through her lower back, making her cry out. It was followed by a tightening in her belly, a powerful clenching that stole her breath. She leaned against a tree, panting as the contraction slowly subsided. No, not now. It's too soon. But her body had its own timetable. Another cramp seized her, stronger this time. The stress, the cold, the frantic exertion of her flight. It had been too much. The pup was coming. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. She was miles from any shelter, in the middle of a frozen wilderness, and she was going into labor. The irony was cruel. In fleeing a perceived danger, she had run headlong into a very real one. She needed help. She needed warmth. She needed him. The thought of Theron was a bitter pang of regret. She had misjudged him. She had let her fear win. And now, she and her child would pay the price. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single moment of this intense story. A new sound broke the stillness of the woods, the sound of running paws, of bodies crashing through the undergrowth. It was not the disciplined tread of Theron's guards. It was a wild, frantic pursuit. A familiar, hated scent hit her a moment later, carried on the wind. Yorick. He had found her. How? Had he followed her from the fortress? Or had their border meeting been a ruse? It didn't matter. He was here. She could hear his voice, a triumphant, ugly bark. There she is! The little bitch thought she could run. She saw them then. 4 wolves breaking through the trees, their forms sleek and gray against the snow. Yorick was in the lead, his human form still intact, a cruel smile twisting his handsome face. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her strained posture, the way she clutched her belly. "Right on time," he sneered. "I'll take my son from your worthless body myself." Another contraction ripped through her, and she collapsed to her knees with a strangled cry, curling into a protective ball over her stomach. This was it, the end of her desperate fight. She had failed. She had led her pup right into the monster's grasp. Jorik's men began to circle her, their movements predatory, their amber eyes glowing in the twilight. Jorik took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, and then the world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a seismic shift in the fabric of the world, a wave of power so immense, so primal, that it shook the very trees and sent the snow cascading from their branches. The air grew thick, heavy with a pressure that crushed the breath from her lungs. Yorick and his men froze, their sneers turning to expressions of pure terror. They looked past her, into the darkening woods from which she had come. A low growl rumbled through the forest, a sound that was less animal and more geological, the sound of mountains grinding together. And then he emerged from the shadows. It was not Theron, the man. It was something else. A beast of nightmare and legend. He was immense, a creature that stood as tall as a horse at the shoulder, his body a corded mass of muscle and midnight black fur. His form was that of a wolf, but a wolf as a common dog is to a dire predator of the ancient world. His eyes, they were the only familiar thing. They glowed with a furious silver light, incandescent with rage. This was the king's secret. This was his true form. A lichen, a creature of myth, thought to be extinct for centuries. The raw, untamed power rolling off him was suffocating. He was not just an alpha. He was a god of the hunt, a primal force of nature. Yorick stared, his face ashen. "It cannot be," he stammered. The great beast took another step forward, the ground trembling. His gaze was not on Yorick. It was on Ilara, kneeling in the snow, and in those terrifying, glowing eyes she saw not just rage, but a desperate, agonizing fear. Fear for her. The Lycan King let out a roar, a sound of pure, untamed fury that tore through the forest and ripped a scream from Yorick's men. They broke, their pack discipline shattering in the face of such overwhelming power. 2 of them turned to flee. They didn't get 5 feet. The great wolf moved in a blur of black fur and silver light. There was a sickening crunch of bone, a choked-off yelp, and then silence. He dispatched the second wolf with the same brutal, terrifying efficiency. He was not fighting. He was exterminating. Jorik, paralyzed by fear, finally broke from his stupor. He shifted, his gray wolf form appearing smaller, pathetic, next to the primeval creature before him. He tried to run, but Theron was on him in an instant, his massive jaws closing around Yorick's neck. There was no fight. Only a final, desperate whimper, and then a deafening silence. The great wolf stood over the body of his rival, his chest heaving, his fur spattered with blood that steamed in the cold air. Then, slowly, he turned his massive head and looked at Ilara. He took a step toward her, and she flinched, the sheer scale of his power and violence overwhelming her. Seeing her fear, he stopped. A low, pained sound, almost a whine, rumbled in his chest. And then, in a ripple of shadow and shifting bone, he was a man again. Theron stood before her, naked to the waist, his skin gleaming in the moonlight. Blood dripped from a cut on his cheek. But his beautiful, silver eyes, were fixed on her, filled with a desperate, heartbreaking tenderness. He rushed to her side, falling to his knees in the snow beside her, ignoring the carnage around them. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice ragged. "Are you hurt? The pup?" He's coming, she gasped, another wave of pain washing over her. His expression shifted from fury to fierce, focused purpose. Here, he said, shrugging out of the remains of his tunic and laying it on the snow. He gently helped her lie back, his hands infinitely careful. Breathe, Ilara. Breathe with me. I am here. I will not leave you. And she did. She focused on his voice, a steady anchor in a sea of pain. She gripped his hands, his strength flowing into her. He was no longer a terrifying beast or a distant king. He was just Theron, his eyes filled with love and fear and devotion, coaching her, comforting her, his presence a solid, unshakable shield against the world. In the heart of the dark, silent forest, surrounded by the evidence of his savage power, he helped her bring their child into the world. As the pup's first cry, strong and healthy, cut through the cold air, Theron's composure finally broke. A tear traced a path through the blood and grime on his cheek. He carefully wrapped the newborn in another piece of his clothing and placed him on Ilara's chest. A boy. A perfect, tiny boy, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were the same startling, impossible silver as his father's. My son, Theron whispered, his voice thick with awe. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to Ilara's, his body trembling. You are my mate, he said, his voice a raw, broken vow. This child is my heir. This is my pack. You are home. I swear on my life, you will never be alone or afraid again. Lying in the snow, her body exhausted but her heart soaring, Ilara looked from the fierce, devoted face of her king to the precious new life in her arms. He was right. After a lifetime of running, of being cast out and rejected, she was finally, impossibly, home. Can you believe what just happened? If this scene gave you chills, hit that like button and share this with someone who loves epic love stories. The journey back to the fortress was nothing like her flight from it. Theron, in his immense wolf form, carried her and the newborn pup as if they weighed nothing at all. She was nestled against the thick, warm fur of his back, her son tucked safely against her chest, wrapped in layers of Theron's own clothing and her cloak. His movement was as smooth as flowing water, a ground-eating lope that was both incredibly fast and jarringly gentle. His honor guard, who had met them on the path, formed a protective perimeter around them, their expressions a mixture of awe and fierce loyalty. They had seen their king's true form, his savage protection of his family, and their respect for him, and, for her, had been forged into something unbreakable. When they arrived, Anya and a healer were waiting, their faces etched with worry that melted into profound relief. Ilara was swept back into her warm chambers, where the fire had been built into a roaring blaze. She was cleaned, tended to, and settled into the soft bed, her son, now washed and swaddled in fine linen, sleeping peacefully in a bassinet by her side. Theron never left her side. He dismissed the healer and Anya with a quiet word, choosing to tend to her himself. He brought her broth, holding the spoon to her lips with a steady hand. He bathed her face with a warm cloth. His every touch was filled with a reverence that made her heart ache. The terrifying king, the primal beast, was gone. In his place was a man so gentle, so devoted, that she could hardly reconcile the two. I thought I had lost you, he said later, as he sat in a chair pulled close to her bed, his large hand enveloping hers. When I found your scent leading away from the fortress, and Yorick's scent following, I have never known such fear. I was the one who was afraid, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I am so used to being disposable. I thought you would trade me to him to protect your kingdom. The pain in his eyes was sharp. There is no kingdom without you, he said, his voice fierce. You are its heart, Ilara. You were from the moment I first saw you. I am not just a wolf. My kind, the lichens. We have one mate. for our entire existence. We know them on a soul-deep level the instant we find them. For a century, I believed I was the last of my kind, that I would be alone forever. And then I found you. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. I did not claim you as a king claims territory. I recognized you as the other half of my soul. His words filled the cracks in her broken heart, healing wounds she didn't even know she had. All her life, she had been made to feel like she was less, that her omega nature made her weak and subservient. But this man, this ancient and powerful being, saw her as his equal, his completion. That night, she slept more deeply than she ever had in her life, her hand in his, her son breathing softly beside her. She was not a guest. She was not a pawn. She was the Luna Queen, and this was her home. In the weeks that followed, Alara healed, her body and spirit nurtured by Theron's unwavering care. She watched him with their son, whose name they decided was Kael. The sight of the powerful king holding their tiny infant with such tenderness, whispering to him in the old lichen tongue, never failed to melt her heart. He was a natural father, his protective instincts now fully focused on his small family. Theron formally presented her and Kael to his court and his people. He stood before them in the great hall, with Alara at his side, and their son in his arms. He did not hide the circumstances of their meeting. He told them of her exile, but he framed it not as a story of shame, but as a tale of survival and a mother's strength. The silver moon pack cast out a diamond, believing it to be a common stone. He declared, his voice ringing with pride. Their blindness is our greatest blessing, for this is Alara, my mate, your queen. And this is Kael, my son, and your future king. They are the heart of this kingdom, and you will show them the honor they are due. A roar of approval went up from the assembled crowd. There was no judgment in their eyes, only adoration for their king and the family he so clearly cherished. Alara, who had once stood alone to be shamed by her pack, now stood beside a king, celebrated by his. The transformation was absolute. She was no longer Alara the outcast. She was Alara, the queen, the mate of the Lichen King, the mother of his heir. But more importantly, she was simply Alara, a woman who had found her own strength and had it recognized by the one person in the world who mattered. Her past was a scar, but it was no longer an open wound. It was a part of her story, the dark path that had, against all odds, led her into the light. The final loose thread of her old life was tied off a week later. A messenger reported that the Silver Moon Pack, leaderless and shamed by Yorick's actions, had collapsed. The wolves had scattered, seeking refuge in other territories. Her old life was not just behind her, it had ceased to exist. One evening, months later, Ilara stood on the balcony of their chambers, watching the sunset paint the snow-capped mountains in hues of gold and crimson. Kael, now a healthy, gurgling baby, was asleep in his cradle inside. The air was crisp and cold, but she felt nothing but warmth. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar, beloved scent filled her senses. Theron rested his chin on her shoulder, his large body a perfect shield against the evening chill. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, simply watching the day end. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She leaned back into his embrace, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips. She thought of the crumbling cabin, of the gnawing hunger and the bone-deep loneliness. She thought of the fear and the shame. And then she thought of this, the safety of these arms, the sound of her son's soft breathing, the feeling of a heart that was finally, completely, whole. "More than I ever thought possible," she whispered. He tightened his embrace, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I promise you a lifetime of sunsets," he murmured. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his strong jaw. She looked into his silver eyes, eyes that had once terrified her, and saw her own reflection, cherished and beloved. "You are my sunset," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the end of all the darkness." And as he lowered his head to kiss her, she knew it was the truth. Hope was no longer a pale, tenacious weed growing in the ruins. It was a vibrant, thriving forest, deep-rooted and stretching as far as the eye could see. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now because we have so many more epic tales coming your way. Don't miss out on what's next.